Kerbonauts! This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 41 of Project Odyssey. Today we are launching the Hydra. If you remember at the end of the last episode, we had a slight problem. We had to do an abort. Things were exceedingly unstable. It was shifting around like a bucking bronco, and after it started to flip out of control, they punched the abort button and descended down into the ocean instead of going to space. Well, I've made several modifications, so this is essentially like a Hydra 2 as far as Project Odyssey goes, or this version right here. The modifications were primarily with the stacking nodes, how big they were, how many there were, what attached to what. I'll show a little bit about how that was rearranged once we can get down into the VAB and take a closer look at the little differences. But for now, we can see that Valentina and Kessler are headed up to the Kopernicus, and this time we're doing a much better job. There are still a few rough edges. They'll have to be orbiting for about 3 hours before they can make their rendezvous, and the inclination's off a little bit, but not too bad. So while we wait for them, let's go take a look at the little changes that improved how this flew. Well, for starters, I found that the SRB itself had somehow gotten its volume set incorrectly. It didn't have enough fuel in it, so we weren't getting enough thrust before we made it out of the atmosphere. We were slowing down just a little bit too much because of that curve that controls the thrust. So I fixed that first, and then the next thing I did was I welded in the avionics ring up here to the SRB, because one of my conclusions was that instability was coming from shaking. The shaking was coming from all of the parts that go from here all the way down to here, having insufficient mass to support the gigantic parts that I like to use. By welding the avionics ring into the SRB, that meant that the joint for the little part that was in between here didn't have to support the entire weight of the upper stages. Now the SRB itself is. So that prevented wiggle at this one joint right here. Second, I added a new node to the fuel tank. Previously, it had been this engine right here that was connected to the node that was inside the fairing. But now, if you see, when we take this off, there's an extra node right there. So that node right there is the one that's actually controlling the engine. You can see the node for the engine is down in the engine instead of up at the top of it. That way, it'll connect in the right location. With the node here, the larger one at the top being what the decoupler connects to, and having the decoupler have a decent amount of mass itself, that means that the joint between here and here is fairly strong because the decoupler is large, and the joint between the decoupler and the whole fuel tank is going to be strong because the fuel tank has a lot of mass. And while I was at it, I decided to weld those hydrazine tanks that you can see on the side into the fuel tank because I figured I always want to have some hydrazine, so why not weld them in and reduce the part count? You'll also notice at the top here that I welded in a few more parts just to make them all part of this lower fuel tank and increase its mass while reducing the connection node points. This tank used to be connected to a little piece right in here, which was then connected to this decoupler, but by welding them all together, now we have only one joint right there at the top that connects to the one joint of the bottom of this tank. Once again, just like before, the fuel is the connection point now to the rest of the craft. This is not. This has its node right there. So the engine goes onto the fuel tank and the lower stage goes onto the fuel tank rather than the engine going to the lower stage and then up to the tank. Also, all of the nodes from the bottom all the way to the top are one size bigger and consistently sized. Since everything I have is so much larger, I had to increase that to make sure that all those joints had enough strength. So you can see that one and then that one, larger nodes. The bottom here has larger nodes, all the way right up to the top. Yep, the flight up here was relatively simple. The takeoff was easy. It was easy to control, finally. It had the tiniest shake as we were going through max Q, but it never really felt like it was in danger of flipping out or going out of control or anything. So here we have Kessler and Valentina preparing for their rendezvous with the Kopernicus, or at least the first module of the Kopernicus. This is, I'm not sure if I said this before, but probably going to be about 10 launches just to get the Kopernicus up Let's see if we can count them out. There are 3 modules that will go down through a central core, all docked together end to end. Then there will be 3 identical modules that will dock around the outside because there will be docking ports on one that we're going to be sending up soon. Then attached to those, there will be 3 more modules. But these will be all different with roles based on different things you need to do, like one of them will be life support and one will be communications and science, that kind of thing. So that's 3, 3, and 3, and that's 9 right there. 10 if you count the fact we have to send up a Hydra with crew, and technically this is just Kessler and Valentina. There will have to be other crew launches to get everyone else who needs to go. I'm figuring at least 6, maybe more. So 1 or 2 more Hydra launches ought to do it. So all in all, that's about 12 different launches to get this thing built and fully stocked, and that's assuming we don't have to send up any kind of repair vessel or any kind of refueling or supplies or anything like that. Well, we're coming up now on the end of the usefulness of that lower stage that we still have attached there. It's still full of a bunch of fuel, but Svetlana's moon mission is bringing in all kinds of fuel. We don't care anymore. We have plenty to go around, no worries. So even though we decoupled right there with our tank still about half full or half empty or however it is, whether you're a pessimist or an optimist, how you want to look at that, we don't care. Just toss it away into the universe. That stage has the ability to autonomously flip itself around and go and burn up so that it's not orbital debris. Although that I think is going to be happening off screen. On screen, we're going to dock up with the Copernicus, but they're not going to board it right away. We're going to just attach the computers together through the docking port mechanism, which will then allow Valentina and Kessler to run it through a bunch of tests. We'll be able to extend out the additional solar panels, the radiator, the habitation module, exercise all the systems, run several diagnostic routines, and make sure that everything is tip-top shape before they open up that port and actually travel into the Copernicus. Kessler also needs to install some special software that wasn't ready when the Copernicus was launched, but it's ready now and he's brought it along. We're going to install it directly from our computer into the Copernicus. What it's going to do is set up several subroutines in the main computer that will allow us later, once we have some special science modules docked, to analyze those anomalies that are continually flashing all over Kerbin, because he thinks that he has an idea on how we can stop that process. Well, I don't know if you noticed that, but there was a bit of a shake when the habitation module was inflated, and I had that sped up to a higher speed. That's not really how fast it inflates, but it's so slow that I didn't want to have you sit through the entire inflation. But what happened there was, as it inflated, it bumped into one of the solar panels on the Hydra. So after that, I realized, oh, we have to in the future make sure if we're docking on that lower port that those solar panels are pulled back in. And so as you see us going through this next little cinematic view, you're going to see that now those solar panels have been retracted to make sure that that spinning habitation module doesn't continue colliding with the panels as it goes around. Okay, now check out this lumbering beast of a launch. It's essentially the exact same launcher that brought up the first Copernicus module, but this time the payload is a little bit heavier than that one. I think it was something like 100 tons overall heavier, and that is resulting in this extremely slow start off of the launch pad. But I suppose the nice thing about acceleration is you don't lose it. Well, not as long as gravity isn't pulling you back, which I guess at the moment it is, but pretty soon we'll be heading parallel to the ground and then it will stop. And therefore, any acceleration is good acceleration. I mean, just imagine you have like an ion engine. What if it were only accelerating you at 1 centimeter per second? That's 0.01 meters per second. But do that for a month. That's 30 days times 24 hours per day times 3,600 seconds per hour. That 1 millimeter per second is just about 26,000 meters per second by the time you get done with that. And that's what would happen with something like a real futuristic engine. It would just be able to burn 24 hours a day, spend half of the trip burning to get there, and half of the trip burning to slow down. As long as you have a super high ISP, it won't take very much mass to do that. And I guess that's all, of course, assuming that we're not moving into the world of warp engines or something like that. Okay, so you can see in the background there, we are essentially launching in the middle of a storm system of atmospheric anomalies flashing constantly all over the place, and that's why Tesla needs to run that experiment up on the Copernicus as soon as we can get those science modules and software, because if we don't figure out how to stop this, we could be jeopardizing a really important mission and have no idea. What if one of those were to zap us as we were launching, or send us into another dimension by opening a wormhole, or start this whole thing over again? That would be horrible. Now check this one out. On that bottom orbit, the sort of greenish yellow line, we have the Copernicus coming along. It's almost passing over mission control now. You can see us launching there. We have our suborbital trajectory. Now check this out as the orbit gets closer and closer to the target Copernicus orbit. Notice that close approach is really close. Every now and then, I happen to get just about the most perfect approach that I can imagine. And today is going to be one of those days. Look at this. I'm making a maneuver as we're still climbing here that will try and refine that close approach just a little bit closer to the Copernicus. And then as we make our burn here, take a look over at the close approach distance indicator in my flight computer. 300 meters, 100, 40 meters. Well, 40 to 50, but really close. I've intentionally left the fairing on this entire time because there are struts inside there that are holding it stable, but now we can release that because it's time to decouple the actual payload. Also notice we had those nifty little retro thrusters on the fairing. I love those. I took the Copernicus 1 launcher, and in there we have put this different module. If we pull away the launcher itself, we can take a look at what we have sent up. Once again at the top, I have a little decoupler there that I can attach struts to. And below that, we have ourselves a space tug. This is the same kind of space tug we were using at Odyssey Station, so you have seen that before. Then down here at the bottom, this is one welded piece. From here all the way down to here, it's one welded piece. We can find that over here in our section of all the different modules. Take a look at that one thing. I love that. Being able to weld this stuff together makes it so that I can have these extra bits that stick out on the side and give it all these extra functionalities without needing to have all the extra parts. Then we will scroll our way up here, and you can see that we have very little on this one. There's a docking port on the front, what will essentially amount to being the bridge right there. Then down here, we have that core module with 3 docking ports on the outside and 4 RCS ports. And up in between that bridge and the living space down here that has water and oxygen life support, we have ourselves a large inflatable habitat. This is the majority of their living space, probably where they're going to have their bedrooms and things like that. Alrighty, here we are with the new module heading over to the nearby Copernicus now, except I have forgotten to decouple that stack separator that was on that space tug we had. So we'll decouple that right now and then just use our RCS to back away from it, let that thing drift off into nowhere. After that, I'll just speed up the playback of us docking here, bringing it into position. We've come in on the wrong side. The side that's facing the screen right now on the module that's on the right, that is the docking port. The docking port is built into that one part. Another cool thing I was able to do by welding it together is tell it that that edge was a docking port. But the docking port that we're targeting is on the far side. It's the spinning habitation module. So we need to get on the opposite side of the first, I was going to say Odyssey module, but no, this is the Copernicus module. We need to get on the far side of the Copernicus module, and then we can ease our way into position and dock ourselves up with the spinning habitat. Now don't worry, the part that we're docking to is not actually spinning. The spinning part is a rotor that revolves around the core. So that means we don't have to worry about some sort of interstellar endurance spinning docking sequence or anything, and we don't have to stop the habitation section from spinning. We can just go right up there and dock to it. Unfortunately, it was right about there that I had a crash in the game, so I reloaded from a quick save from right before I had decoupled that stack separator, forgot to decouple it the second time, and just went up and re-docked. But docking looked the same as the first time, so just showed the first time. And now we can see that Valentina has inflated the habitation module, while Kesla is continuing to run computer diagnostics on that new module to make sure that it's still safe to be inside. That's when he realized, hey, somebody hasn't released that stack separator. Let's go ahead and do that now. So they do that, and they once again use their RCS to back away from that little bit, just this time attached to the entire Copernicus.
I demand to know what's happened to my ship. You're in no position to make demands, but I'll tell you, there's still been no communications from them. If you'd give us the transponder frequencies like we asked, I'm giving you nothing. Computer, pause playback. Look, if we work together, we can find a way to save both our peoples. You're the ones who caused this. Bill admitted it. That's true, but it was an accident. Come. Let's sit and discuss this. Computer, resume playback. Come on, Komolak. I'll introduce you to some of our snacks and music and show you we have something to save.
And now we return to the Copernicus. It's time to launch another module. This is going to be the first one of 3 identical modules. I'll show you what the first one looks like, and then I'm just going to dock up the other 2 with a very quick run through. You will have seen the first one, so it won't matter. Right now, we're waiting for the Copernicus to come over the launch site, while at the same time having the launch site in the daytime. Then we'll just slow down the warp speed here and go to the launch pad and oh, what? Oh my. Oh, Kraken attack. All right, let's do that one over again. Okay, take number 2 is looking much more stable. This is another 7.5 meter lower stage, although we have changed the solid boosters. The problem with the previous 2 launches, and why I switched to the larger solid boosters, is the small ones, when they decouple, they fall down under the engine and get exposed to the exhaust. They're so small that the heat from the exhaust of the main engines just explodes them instantly as they drop down. And if I put little retros on them to push them away from the booster, they have to get pushed away so fast relative to the mass and size of those little itty-bitty boosters that they explode just from the G-forces. But these larger ones, these work much better. And on top of that, I had a second reason. My second launch cut it a little bit too close in terms of fuel consumption when we were going up, so I decided with larger boosters on the bottom, that will ensure that we have a fairly decent margin of error for all future launches as well, just in case something is really heavy. And speaking of heavy, surprisingly, this one is the heaviest of all. You might think that the others would be really heavy because they were 1,500 kilotons, 1,600 kilotons, and really big modules, and this module isn't as big. Well, in fact, because of those boosters and the extra fuel that we're carrying, just to ensure that margin of error to make sure we get into orbit with plenty left over for all kinds of maneuvering and never cut it close again, we are nearly 2,000 kilotons on this launch. It's 1964. I also get asked a lot of the time in comments and stuff, hey, what was the thrust on that launcher? Well, let me give you some of the parameters of this particular one. As I said, it's 1964 kilotons, made up of about 200 parts, and between the 8 core engines and the 6 solid boosters, we're generating over 32,000 kilonewtons of force. We're 7.5 meters in diameter, not counting the solid boosters. Counting the solids, it's 11 meters in diameter. and 74 meters tall. The module itself is just about 21 tons, 10 meters long, and about 6.5 meters in diameter. Although diameter on this isn't really a good representation because it's sort of a square, so it's 6.5 on the long edge. Well, it's a rectangle. It's 6.5 on the long edge and maybe 4.5 on the short edge. Although none of that counts the inflatable habitat that's on this one. We have some extra living space on there. We won't be inflating that one today, though. That will be once all of them are hooked up all at the same time, and then Valentina will activate those and continue doing various tests. Okay, so there is some hydrazine on the module, and there are some RCS jets on there, some large station-sized jets. However, there's no other propulsion, and it has no command module, so there's no way for us to do anything with it. We need to go over there and get it, so that's why we have decoupled our space tug from the nose of the Copernicus, and we're going to head over and grab onto that module with the space tug, drag it back, and then attach it to one of 3 docking ports that's around the core module. So now you should be getting the idea of what this is going to look like, since this has that long segment with the crew tunnel on it and a docking port, and there are 3 docking ports on the core module, and we're going to be launching 3 identical ones of this. You can see now how this is going to stick out from the core module in 3 different directions. Then there will be extra modules in between these, connecting it all together and then strutted down to the main core, creating that little bit of an Endurance from Interstellar look, but, you know, not really at the same time, because it looks also so much like the Constellation Mars mission from our universe. All right, it's docked up, which means we no longer need the stack separator that was giving us the extra docking port. That way it could be maneuvered around. So we'll release that, we'll release the docking port, and then we'll go redock the space tug up to some port until we can send up the next module. But that will be next time. Until then, I will see you later, Kerbinauts.